The worst workshops are, uh, um, I mean that at the conference, at the seminar, like the situations are different because when you have a conference, still some people will come after lunch, and but when there is a seminar, so you cannot hide behind anybody else. So So now we're going to have two technical presentations dealing with the design and estimate documents. A couple of words about the theory of design and estimate expenditure documents. These are the documents which determine architectural function and technological, constructive and engineering and technical solutions, technical refurbishment of facilities and engineering utility structures. The goal of design and estimate documents is to determine architectural, functional, technological, constructive, and engineering and technical solutions that will constitute the basis for your project, for your design, which means that design and estimate documents are the documents or are the guidances on the basis of which the construction company will then reinforce your building and lay the district heating system and change the lights in the street lighting system. The documents consist of the graphical part, which are the drawings, the explanatory documents, and these are the bill of quantities, which are the expenditure documents. In the English version, this is technical design or TD, and we will further on use this. So for you to know that TD stands for design and estimate documents, and you may have also bill of quantities. Um, Technical design is regulated by a lot of norms, which are characteristic of a lot of countries, all the countries of Eastern Partnership, which means that if audit may vary in terms of the approaches the countries apply, their technical design documents are regulated by regulatory standard acts available in each country, because each country has its own approaches to technical design, and this is a well-structured process. And quite often, almost always, the designers to be involved in the process do know all the national requirements set for them in respect to development of this document. These documents must follow the norms set. You, as the customer, give the task to the designer, and the final design should meet this input data. Besides that, there are additional norms regulating the development of technical design. These are city planning, general construction principles. Tamara has mentioned this. I mean that there may be additional requirements, local cultural ones to certain buildings. And if we speak about, let's say, facilities which are located in the historically valuable area or which are within the heritage, UNESCO heritage, some other heritage laws, the designer should take this into account while preparing the technical design, because it may so happen that this building cannot be thermally refurbished because the changes in the facade of the building is not allowed by certain cultural or other restrictions. That is how a step-by-step development of procedure for technical design development as viewed by us. So we start with the development of the technical task, of technical assignment, uh, and it is your duty as the customer to develop it. This is the clear vision of your facility after the reconstruction, after the refurbishment, and these are the main customers' requirements to architectural, functional, technological, constructive solutions used for the construction facility at the construction stage. And it is important that the designer responsible for the development of technical design be independent both of the team of the project and of the authorities uh, and of any would-be company that would perform works in the future and would be involved in construction. This is a standard European best practice when the designer is objective and applies an objective approach to planning of all technical and architectural solutions, and when he designs a building regardless of the actions of a certain producer, which means that he is not dependent either on the producer or the contractor or the team of the project. Here are templates of technical assignments, and they are also available on our webpage. So please feel free to address them and to use them as kind of prompts and templates. Besides that, we recommend you to make all the designers you are involving for your projects acquainted with the technical guidances developed by the support team within the first project phase. Now we have a guidance on thermal refurbishment of buildings, and in fact, let me tell you that we have already tested this guidance in practice. We have worked with it, and real designers have worked with it, and they stress that this is quite a realistic and adequate guidance which meets the national norms, and this manual, this guidance is good for daily use. Uh, Similar guidances will be developed on street lighting and a little bit later on heat supply systems. They are based on the European practice. In particular, the thermal refurbishment guidance is in fact a simplified ethics standards. These are the instructions dealing with thermal refurbishment of buildings, but simplified and laid out in a very simple form for future designers. How to deal with the basic approaches and with the basic units of refurbishment to be refurbished. Here is the approximate composition of the technical assignment of the terms of reference. I wouldn't talk in detail, but just I wanted to show you how many items are included there to make you scared, for you to pay more attention to it. And performance of this assignment, as Larissa has mentioned, requires that the whole team works with it. And it's okay that the project manager doesn't have the necessary technical skills necessary for designing. That's why the technical assignment shall be prepared by the technical expert with good experience of developing such documents, and this must be an expert who has already been involved in the implementation of the project and has some proper specific skills and knowledge. The only thing to be mentioned here is that the customer's duty, which means your duty, municipality's team duty, is to provide all the input data for the designer. And among those data, you have the conclusions on the results of instrumental study of constructions of building structures. Mainly that is for buildings, and you as the customer within the technical assignment, within the terms of reference, should provide the designer with the conclusions from the reports saying that your building is absolutely suitable for thermal refurbishment and it has no deficiencies as of the current date, and the carrying capacity of this building is sufficient to bear additional load related to placement of additional insulation weight or some other roof, heavier roof. So these things should be calculated mathematically and should be confirmed and approved by a certified specialist. Here is a real building, a real situation in Ukraine. Seems to me this is Mykolaiv region. You can see that this is the beginning of the refurbishment and the windows were partially replaced. And during replacement of windows in the part of it, unfortunately it collapsed. And part of the wall fell down because before the commencement of works, no study was made, and then after, as a result of the post-examination showed, there were problems with this system because the water sewerage system was not maintained in the proper condition. There were problems in the wall, and at some point of time, when there was demolition of the building or the part of those windows, this part was actually hanging on the windows, and with no human victims, but this building collapsed, and the headmaster, the only victim was that the headmaster then committed suicide. I'm not just trying to scare you. I'm just trying to recommend you to pay more attention to things like ensuring you and your team and the city in which you work against such negative outcomes. Another step at the stage of technical design development is coordination of the technical assignment or the terms of reference on our part. So at least we are trying to check whether all the recommendations I've already mentioned to you are included into the template, into your technical assignment, and whether your technical assignment has been prepared in a high quality way. In fact, this stage is not long, and I think that you have enough experts, you have enough capacity to prepare it. You have seen already step number 3. The only thing that in 100% of cases the designer must have the corresponding licenses and certificates which are envisaged by the national legislation and have the necessary experience of real implementation of similar projects with the confirmation of this experience. Confirmation may be in recommendations, in letters of reference given by other customers, previous customers, so on and so forth. Also, it is of importance to additionally ask during the organization of this competition for the designer to find somebody who has experience of working with international projects and who probably knows something about the requirements of the former practice of Western Europe, because this will make your work easier already at the stage of coordination and approval and document review by us. The fourth step is technical design itself. In practice, this also takes at least 2 months, depending on the size of the project, because we may have street lighting projects and things are simpler with them in terms of technical solutions, while for thermal refurbishment projects, in particular for heating system project, they are a little bit more complicated, and you have much more sections in technical design. Therefore, you need more time to prepare technical design documents. In the first phase, we had some projects that were trying to deal only with bills of quantitatives, with no graphic part, just calculations, only bill of quantities. But I think that this option for the demonstration project won't go. That's why we are insistently recommending you still to develop the graphic part for all projects. I have already mentioned in my previous presentation when I was talking about the general logic standing behind the implementation of projects, uh, that to implement an energy efficiency project, we primarily have to realize how the technical solutions already envisaged by the designer would be used. I mean, to what effects they lead. What does it mean in practice? The auditor has suggested an activity to you. Let it be a replacement of street lighting, and let us three of lamps, ordinary lamps with LED lamps, with the installation of the management system, of control system. And he has said that the cost is 1 million euros. We do remember these plus minus 25%, which means that there may be error uh, at that level. The designer already deals with more accurate figures, so it's probably not 25% already, but 10%. That's why, on the basis of this data, of these figures, which are more accurate, the designer or the energy auditor or the team, the project team, must provide updated results of saving, because the designer has already suggested a specific lamp with specific technical parameters. If we're speaking about street lighting system projects, and they may already have very clear, accurate figures within plus minus 15 or even 10%. Why am I stressing this? Because this is not included into the standard contract with the designer. If they didn't have experience of working similar projects, in 100% of cases, they will say that it's not in their contract and they will not do this. But you have to think it over and how you find a way out of it. For example, the project asks energy auditors to update all the calculations on the basis of more accurate figures and values, like measurements of the area or certain measurement of certain parameters, then the number of lamps, actual capacity, actually boiler house capacity, or any other factor. So the results of savings need to be updated at this stage of the technical design development. That's what you need to achieve. Also, at the same stage, you need to update the financial analysis of the whole project. And again, from our experience, I may tell you that if there was audit of insulation for a school, it had one cost, and after all the activities were taken into account, after the technical design documents were developed, by 30%, this amount was increased, which is quite an amount, and which means that all the energy efficient indicators at the stage of the energy audit were kind of leveled. And this means that the team had a complicated task to squeeze this all into the budget it had.
Then we talk about evaluation or verification of the technical design and bill of quantities. We have already told you how it happens. There is a group of Austrian experts that verify all the documents, and they try to understand whether the project or the drawing meet the European practice, I have just taken a couple of slides from real documents that were submitted to us. Very often they analyze the technical design and bill of quantities and prepare special reports as separate documents that includes their comments. And on the available drawings, they also include their remarks or explanations, what can be corrected. For instance, here they remark that this part of the balcony is not insulated, therefore they reach the heated or cold bridge, so they recommend to correct things here. So they really try to do everything possible for the designer, developer to change these in order to avoid such negative situations, uh, even already at the stage of developing design. In the majority of cases, they state that some documents miss some details. It means there are general planes, but these documents lack small details. For instance, the section of this small detail is not present in the documents, and it's difficult to understand whether this project is good or bad. Thank you, Maxim. I would like to specify, according to our national laws, technical design and bill of quantities, it should be prepared either in Russian or in Belarus language. I'm talking about Belarus for sure. If it should be reviewed by the European experts. Does it mean that there are experts who know English, or we have to translate all these documents into English? I suppose it can be applied to any documents. We never require additional translation of this or that document. If the translation should be done, we do it with our own efforts. In this particular case, the Austrian developers cooperate with local experts, and this will be either Ukrainian or Belarus expert who speaks Ukrainian or Belarus or Russian, and who will be able to describe these details, these elements for the Austrian experts. I think the drawings do not require lots of translation. They will be able to understand what's what. So actually, no additional translation is needed.
It's easier for us if you can, either in English or Russian, it's easier. Because we have experts that are Russian speaking, and if we, for example, we have to find an Armenian expert to do this, we do not work so much with these experts. So we have our own preferred experts who speak Russian. So if you can deliver it in Russian, it would be great. Английский не обязательно вообще.
And I also would like to add a comment here that the comments we get from our Austrian experts in the majority of cases are also described during our Skype meetings. And particularly during these Skype meetings, we also invite the developers or the designers in case something is not understandable. So we already discuss it during our dialogues, and then the comments or the remarks are specified. Then we get to the stage of selecting specific measures or actions, and it can be so that the measures selected at the stage of energy audit that met the budget after the developing of the design have changed, and it means you have to select already a clear set of measures that are going to be implemented. For instance, I have provided here an example. It can be separation according to the stages, and it was the project on kindergarten thermal refurbishment. Stage 1, insulation, replacement of windows, ventilation and heating system. And the second phase, we do the roof, and the third phase, we do underground and ground part of the building and replace kitchen equipment. So this is an example of how the project can be divided into certain phases or stages. For sure, it's just one example. You can combine different things. The final point I would like to state is that, first of all, you have to choose the priority measures which will make return on investments and which are planned in your project. And for the second phase, for the second stage, you already select those that can be implemented outside of this particular project. Then there should be a meeting of the steering committee with a protocol, and it is already the final procedure, the final step when we talk about development of technical design and bill of quantities. And the municipality makes an official approval of those measures that are going to be implemented. Then we prepare already a combined report on the basis of the project and its documentation, which includes the measures which are going to be implemented and their effect or their influence. There is a question? So we introduce amendments to the logical matrix both after the energy audit and after we work on technical design and bill of quantities. Not necessarily. Only one necessary. So when we talk about energy audit and usually also after technical design, because the prices change very often in the market. For instance, there was a project when we have changed something only after technical design development. But in principle, the project after such changes have the projects you provide now are of good quality, much better than the previous projects, and probably you won't have to change many things. Let's say the European experts do not want something changed, or let's say they do not like the project. So, if to be serious, you'd better include as less amendments, as less modifications into budget, into log frame as possible, because it includes procedural issues. It requires certain resources on the part of the delegation and on your part. Therefore, they really do not like it very much. And in case of Moldova, they actually strongly object to any amendments to the contract. So after you finish the technical design and bill of quantities, after you've verified it with us, after you have finally selected the set of measures that are going to be implemented, we get to the examination stage. So what is meant by examination? This is scientific verification by special organizations regarding meeting all the construction norms and requirements, solutions, etc. The primary goal of the examination is to see that the technical solutions applied in the project meet the requirement and are real in terms of budget. So this examination or verification looks through not only at the through the drawings and technical solutions, but also verifies the prices, the budget, and the requirements, the compliance with the national norms. As a result, after this examination, you already have the maximum price of the project, the threshold of the budget. So after the procurement, the price cannot be higher than the bill of quantities developed by the developers and verified during the examination process. Well, actually, in Ukraine, bill of quantities can so the cost of the facility of the object after the procurement cannot be higher than the budget included into examination, because the examination have already shown you the maximum cost of your project or cost of your object. Another point I have mentioned, I would like to draw your attention to it once again. So after this examination or verification, you submit to us the final documentation, the technical design, the technical part, and the bill of quantities. These are documents which will be the basis of your tender, of your project, which will be the basis for your technical supervision. So I mean, this will be all the documents that later are going to be used during the construction process. And on the basis of these documents, we prepare the combined report, which should be signed by you. The lessons learned. So let's come back to the collapsed building and suicide I was talking about. So there should be a report, not should be, but there must be a report on the facility or object condition. The second point, the project should be developed by independent certified experts. The third point is high quality of technical design and bill of quantities. We have been talking about energy audits a lot today, but very often similar problems appear at the stage of project design or design development. So the more attention you pay to the developer, the designer, the less problems you are going to have at the verification and examination process, as well as at the very construction phase. Terms of documents preparation, the same as for the energy audit. I would like to give an example of Belarus. Instead of 3 months according to the contract, the developer was working on the technical design and bill of quantities for 9 months. It means the period of fulfillment, the terms of fulfillment were exceeded 3 times. Another point is being ready to amend, to modify the documents after they are verified by the support team. Do not make Ukrainian mistakes. One have already paid 100% to the project developer or designer before the verification, and later faced some problems in terms of changing certain issues after this verification. So mind, if you pay 100%, you won't be able to make the developer introduce amendments to the documents. We have also noticed an important point. This is communication between the key stakeholders of the process. At this stage, try already to attract administration of the buildings you work on, or utility enterprises that will be responsible for technical maintenance of the facility, if we are talking about street lighting or heat supply or water supply, because these companies, these or people know such details which are not known to any external people. They know the system from inside, and they really come to help and notice the details not noticed by you. For instance, an example, there is a building, and the developers and the team project were working together, and later it was a school. The headmaster of the school said that the salary, the first part of the underground area of the school is a sort of anti-bombing shelter, and in order to change it, you have to work with some special safety organizations, security organizations, etc., etc. So if so, they did not cooperate with the administration of the building, with the headmaster of the school. And if they did it, they could solve this problem at the initial stage. And the final point is contradiction between national and European practices. I have already given the example of Moldova when certain external constructions were not allowed to be disassembled when the national norms were in opposition to the European practices. So if it is the case, we should find the golden section, the golden middle, and try to convince the members of the examination stage that it is fine from the viewpoint of the national legislation, or in case something is really forbidden by the national legislation, it should be well substantiated for the European experts, for them to understand that their recommendation cannot be used for this or that reason. And again, a couple of specific examples. The key problems about documentation is absence of high-quality detailization. It means some general drawings are done, and the small details are missing. For instance, sections of some details or constructions or corners, like height is missing, is written here, and they are necessary, particularly when we talk about construction stage, because if this drawing is done not in the proper way, the construction company will face difficulties when working with it. When we talk about thermal refurbishment of buildings, it's necessary to analyze the documents regarding the presence of the cold bridge. We talk about the pencil rule when we talk about insulation. And if, for instance, you have forgotten the balcony, this concrete plate will accumulate cold. The temperature here will be lower than the rest of areas in the buildings. There will be humidity here, and here we talk about huge cold breach that will damage the construction and will result in negative consequences. Also, when we talk about complex project on thermal refurbishment, unfortunately, those enterprises that have been done here, we talk about residential buildings, and it was this insulation has been done by the residents themselves. So when we talk about complex thermal refurbishment, this insulator will be removed because we cannot do it without removing it. And in this case, the investments of the residents were spent in vain, and let's say they have used it for 2 years, and it is going to be removed. And the residents always raise a question: I'm not going to pay for the new project because I have done my own insulation of my own flat. Usually we do not work with the residential buildings, but some municipal buildings or educational buildings have already been partially insulated. An example about the windows. When, for instance, the old wooden windows were replaced with plastic ones, unfortunately, the thickness of the frame in these areas was not good enough to work properly. So if you cannot put here at least 5 centimeters of insulator, it means it will be cold here and it will be humidity, etc., etc. So there is no other solution but for full replacement of the window, and it means that the invested funds from the budget again were spent in vain. Everything should be replaced, and these windows should be thrown away or should be got rid of. And you understand that Usually there are lots of tears, lots of effort spent on such windows, but as a result we have this thing. This is an example of thermal refurbishment of the building, of the residential building. It is, by the way, multi-flat building, and it was not possible to replace the windows. We were working. The project was only on insulation of the facade, and people the residents had to replace the windows themselves. So they didn't do it during the insulation stage, they did it later, and as a result they damaged the existing insulation, they had some faults, and again there were negative consequences later. So in case of thermal refurbishment of building, all the windows should be replaced in line with the facade insulation.
You can also further be faced with the problem, the practical problem that the existing drawings for the building do not correspond to reality. For example, you can see additional premises built in the house by the very residents of the residential building, though in the drawings, in the schemes, in the plans, this additional premises is not there. Also, you can see here some unauthorized places of interference into the ventilation system, which are not on the plan, but which are de facto. The designer definitely has to act in accordance with the documents. That's why we have the problem, but according to the documents, there is no problem. Nevertheless, there may be cases like this, and somehow you have to be ready for this as a designer. The general recommendations for a heating project is that before you start planning or before you develop the technical design in details, it's important, as we think, to develop the total concept, the general concept of the boiler house, where there is the boiler, where the number of boilers, where the type of fuel they're going to use, and then this general scheme will make your life easier. It's better to coordinate it with us using our technical experts to work on probably on the details, on all the components of the boiler house for you not to face any controversies when their design documents, the technical design documents are being checked. Also, the general recommendation for all the projects presupposing replacement of both internal and external pipes is to use not only pre-insulated pipes but also pre-insulated other elements like valves, taps, and so on and so forth. Also, the general recommendation, which can be found in most technical design documents, is bad description of the system of management of all the engineering systems. That's why your designer should describe in detail the principles and the algorithms of the functioning of the management system, of the control system, for everybody to have a clear idea as to what reacts to what, how something is closed, how something is opened. This will be necessary for the operating entity to know how to correctly use the equipment. As far as street lighting projects are concerned, it's necessary to have specialized software programs where the designer models street lighting. And there is a special software which allows you to do the model on the basis of input data, like the width of the road, availability of trees, buildings, the interval between supports, the type of lamps you're going to use, and this is the computer software program which provides you with a model of the level of illumination of the surface of the whole road. And it will show you directly where there is extra lighting, and in those red spots, like you have an extra light, and where you have blue, it's like too low level of lighting. And this program also allows you to calculate the difference between the maximum and the minimum allowed deviation, maximum average and the average one. So this is the part which should necessarily be included into the technical design documents for the quality of lighting to finally be uniform, equally distributed, and for it to correspond all the standards for street lighting. I think that's it for technical design documents. If you have any questions, you may ask these questions, and maybe Larissa will add something. Well, as far as technical design documents are concerned, so this is your second most important uh, and long-lasting stage of your project. Of importance for a project manager in this stage of importance is the following. The project manager must first of all choose a qualified project company, design companies, because it is on the quality of its work that further performance of constructions works will depend on. All the elements are interconnected, you know. And it is there that the constructing engineer should start his work, and this is the engineer whom you will appoint as the person responsible for supervision of all the further stages and the performance of construction works, because you as the project manager don't have enough expertise to coordinate this work on a qualified basis. What do you need to do for you, as the customer, must collect all the technical conditions or technical terms related to heat, water. You have to get ready for the design company to have all the input data for designing. You need to also develop highly qualified terms of reference, and I think that on a paid basis you can involve a technical expert for him to do this. This may be a person who works for the municipality, and he will develop good terms of references, which are also coordinated with the support team. Then, after you develop the terms of reference, you need to get the permission from the executive committee for the development of technical design documents and start choosing the contractor which will perform the design works. Design works in Ukraine are works. I mean that you can do them without any open tendering if the amount is under 1.5 million hryvnias. So it is within your mandate to choose the contractor which will do this work, designing works, and you don't necessarily have to use the electronic Prozoro system. What documents need to be submitted to your designer, prospective designer, when you have when you have a competition, for him to provide his project proposal, commercial proposal? Normally, this is the scope of works which need to be done, clear deadlines for the performance of works, also the terms of reference which you have compiled and which you have coordinated with the support team. You also need to provide him with the data of energy audit, because he must get acquainted with this data. And there is also the EU technical guidance on the thermal refurbishment of buildings, which also needs to be given as a supplement, as an attachment to these documents. Beside that, together with the support team, we have developed the guide for the design. So I think that if you finally approve it and decide to use it, you can use it. The designer needs to understand what scope of works he will have to do. What do you need to include into the contract with the designer when you choose it, and when its proposal is accepted by you? I recommend that this contract with the designer includes a couple of things. The first one is that, well, actually two options, but we included technical examination of the building. That's what thing number one. And that service can be rendered by the designer. You can just order it independently from somebody else, or this can be done by the designer within the stage of development of the technical design documents. I mean that the designer can order and this examination and included into the designing works. Also, the design work cost includes technical design, document development, and I recommended that the contract with the designer also includes examination. What do I mean? You, as the customer, order it, but all the organizational parts will be done by the designer and a separate like attachment to the contract. You will just pay for the examination. I mean, you won't have to be overburdened with details. It will be done by the designer. You will just pay the cost because you know the designer already has some contacts and has some experience of working with such examination entities. It's much easier. Besides that, after designing, you will also have a a very serious procedure, which is the tendering procedure for the choice of the contractor. And you will also need a designer here. The designer will have to provide the drawings, which you will place in your systems according to which the procurement will be done. He must also provide explanatory notes, uh, technical specification for procurement of works, which and these documents must include specifications, must include both materials and works. They will have to calculate costs that Maxim has mentioned, costs of facility operation, and in their technical design documents, they also need to take into account the use of new equipment that will be installed in your facility, in your building. They will have to provide you the calculation of the degree of complexity of the facility undergoing examination. Besides that, the contract with the designer, in our case, included provision of the necessary technical assistance in the drawing up of the declaration for the commencement of construction works, because you know customers may be NGOs, maybe municipalities, maybe governments or departments of education, and they don't know how to draw up these documents and what technical parameters need to be set there to draw up the declaration for the commencement of construction works, while all the necessary information can be provided to you by the designer who dealt with the development of technical design documents. Besides that, I would also recommend you to include the expanded author's supervision into that contract, because there is a multi-layer control over performance of construction works, and the designer works rather actively in case of supervision than in the implementation of any other construction project. So these are the points I would recommend you to include into the contract with the designer, and thus you would facilitate, you would make your work and make your life easier. On some other aspects, uh, the fee, the designing fee, then stages like development of technical designs, coordination of these documents with the support team. So if you include those stages, the designer will get the money depending on the works it has already done. With us, it was the case. He developed technical design, he coordinated it, he got the money. Uh, the, the examination was made, he got the money. He prepared the documents tendering documents, technical tendering documents, he got the money. And the last moment he gets the money is after construction works are over. But the support team has already mentioned that, right, your works are over, the works are of a proper quality, and the designer gets the money, the last installment, so to say, for the designing. So in this way, we are trying to keep the contractors, so to say, fit. Since he realizes that if he doesn't work properly, he will just not get the last amount of money, the final portion of money. Maybe it's a little bit too strict and rigid, but the European Commission will also going to be strict with you if you're writing when you're writing interim reports, and if you have delays in project implementation, or if you don't attain certain goals and don't achieve certain indicators, you will have to write explanations why, what the reasons for this were, who was the fault, who was to blame, and if you don't uh, get to the goal, so why do you want the next installment to be paid to you? Also, the designer needs to go, I mean, the stages of the work of the designer. He should go to the field, to the place. He should be provided with all the technical documents which we have about the facility. You have to also involve the managers of the facilities which you're going to refurbish. There must be a meeting with the coordinator of the municipality and the engineer, and these should be weekly meetings because the work must be done quickly. The process should not be delayed, and the technical decisions need to be passed. There is also a highly specific coordination with the Austrian experts representing the support team. And that's why there was developed quite a convenient format, not to throw documents here and there and to study them for weeks. They arranged Skype conferences. Skype conferences are arranged after the Austrian experts have a look at our design documents developed by the designer, make their conclusions, make their remarks, and then online jointly with the designer, and the designer must be ready for that. We answer the questions, we substantiate our technical decisions, we have to respond to their remarks. For example, if they disagree with something, but their suggestions run counter to the Ukrainian norms of legislation, so the designer must be ready for all this. And all those Skype calls are really highly efficient, and thanks to them, we accelerate the process of coordination on technical decisions. And your main goal in designing is getting technical design documents in which all the technical decisions are coordinated with the support team represented by Austrian experts and Ukrainian side experts. You know, not all the issues are easy to be coordinated. For example, we didn't intend to have ventilation. We wrote the design, we wrote about the installation of walls, replacement of window doors, the basement, the roof. But the Austrian experts think that if you do thermal refurbishment of building and you actually seal off windows and doors and the facade and the basement part of so where do you have your ventilation system? If you don't arrange a good ventilation system, then your building in the nearest future will be transformed into a kind of a fungi area, and it will be destroyed finally. Therefore, we had to include our ventilation systems. We agreed to our experts, but we had to remove insulation of roofs from our buildings because this was postponed for the second phase of implementation. Maybe you will also need at the stage of designing to make your choices as to what to include, what to exclude of the project. Also, when we are insulating the windows, we are arranging the slopes for windows, the reveals. So how do we do it, and from what materials? Yes, this is gypsum cardboard. It's used in Ukraine, but it's not used by Austrian experts. And therefore, our project has the special admixtures. So gypsum plasterboard can be done within a month, but this finishing which we apply and those admixtures which we apply needs about 3 months. So you have also to coordinate this. And there can be a lot of things like this. Your designer must be ready for this. must be ready to discuss this, to talk to the authorities, to the steering committee on these points, for them to finally approve all the designed documents, and then these documents will become the basis for your tender for procurement. Now, the Ukrainian legislation has it that technical design document for capital repair should undergo comprehensive examination. There used to be only examination for the part of bills of quantities, and now, well, the legislation has, in inverted commas, become more simplified, and we need to undergo complex, comprehensive examination, which may run up to 3 months or even more. 3 months is the best case scenario. And after the technical design documents are developed by the support team, by the Austrian experts, according to the handover certificate, it is given over to the customer. Under the handover certificate, with all the volumes, so you have in this act to indicate all the volumes available in technical design documents, the calculation of the degree of complexity and other things like this. Because, otherwise somebody will forget something, somebody will not do this. In particular, if we are talking about a municipality or the Department of Education, where people are not generally knowledgeable in this. After you get these technical design documents, you arrange an order for the organizations on approval of the technical design documents and putting it into operation. I mean that further you can work with it within your tender procedures and when construction works are being done.
Another remark, when, for instance, we designed individual heat points in our buildings, the practice has shown that there is a recommendation, together with individual heat points, also plan replacement of all the meters and all the blocking devices, because we actually planned only individual heat points, while the other measures I have mentioned were not envisaged. And now we are doing all this, we are replacing all this, so please, I recommend immediately plan it. So actually, everything around it, manometers, thermometers. Another remark for the teams: before you start the design project, probably plan some time, some more time, because we also should remember the development of national legislation. Ukrainian experience has shown that last year our national legislation was changed, and it significantly influenced, delayed actually, the design development and beginning of construction works. The rules, new rules appeared, additional examinations and verification procedures were necessary, and it really influenced a lot on the pre-planned schedules, etc. So please try to monitor the legislation regarding some issues. Also, a question, probably Larissa will answer it. In Ukraine, there is such a practice when construction examination actually removes the articles or items from the budget, and there is such a point as the supervision by the author. Just very small amount of money is left, and it's very difficult for the cities to find highly qualified designers. I mean, in small cities. As a rule, these just these are highly qualified designers available only in big cities. And if you hire them, you have to pay a lot for them, and you really do not have this amount of money. I don't know the case in the other towns, but really our state bodies would like to remove as many budget articles, budget items as possible, even if it is the project is funded by the EU. So what I would state here, the designer, constructor should probably plan the best materials for the construction, and it should be included into technical design documents. The examination should get the letter that the customer of the project is the European Union that actually funds the project. And we all the time repeated that in all the documents that these works are funded by the European Union according to the technical requirements of the European Union. We have repeated these words again and again, and probably in this case they do not have lots of space and they do not cut our budgets a lot. Yes, you were right to state that they try to save as much as possible, but in our case we managed to prove that we really require extended construction design supervision, and we provided all the references to the projects funded by the European Union and the requirements of the European Union. So the members of the examination board didn't actually interfere. And we really had a specific article for construction design supervision. So in case you planned a certain amount, if a certain amount was planned, it was okay. And if we need extended construction design supervision, that's okay, because we fund it from the European Union. And you have the right to take money for this from another item of the budget. The same is about technical supervision. But actually, I did not exceed 5% from the general amount of the investment bill of quantities. Actually, we had less. Unfortunately, there is no mic. In Armenia, it is 1%.
We have big budgets in our projects. We are around €1 million on average. If you think the money in your budget for the technical design is not enough to have a normal autorský názor, then you should increase it in the budget. Very easy. You can ask that from the delegation, and you can do that. The same with the energy audit. You always can increase the amount. It should not be that because we lack a couple of €1,000 that we risk poor quality throughout the project. So if you want technický názor, I think it's very important, because in general, technical názor is of poor quality in other countries. We know that. So autorský názor can make a difference, and they don't have to come every week, but you can ask them to come when they do the first mineral wool or the first window. So they can come a couple of times. They don't have to come all the time, but just enough to be sure that they check on the most important moments. And maybe you will have to increase in the budget. You have to increase with a couple of €1,000. No big deal. We are in favor. The EU delegation also will be in favor. So don't make that a limitation, because tomorrow we'll talk about that. There is possibilities to play around in the budget, so you can increase the amounts for certain activities.
Ну и тут еще я дополню.
And I will also add here,
Есть определенные нормы,
there are certain maximum norms, percentage, which can be spent on author supervision and technical supervision according to the legislation. But again, you are not limited, and you may have a separate contract for specific services, and you may conclude this contract with the designer For instance, it can be about additional high-quality supervision or control. So you can just go around the legislation and do not include it into the budget, but, for instance, have a separate contract for technical and design supervision. So you'll have a different contract, actually.
Ви заключаєте там з компанією X.
For instance, let's say it's a company X, and the agreement is, the contract is not for technical supervision, but for provision of services or consulting services regarding the monitoring of the project.
Еще одна ремарка, то, что говорила
Another
Лариса,
point
что,
is what Larissa has mentioned.
состоянию здания
This
можно
report on building condition can be included into the technical design and bill of quantities documentation. It can be done, but sometimes there can be a situation that the report will be negative. It means the opinion of the engineer will be such that this building cannot be subject to thermal refurbishment. So probably it's better to do this report before the energy audit, because if you have such a negative report on the building condition, it means no project, and the energy audit, if you have already done it, will be not necessary. It means you have spent your money in vain because you cannot do thermal refurbishment in this particular building. There is a question to Larissa. She was modest about it. Could you please share your experience? It seems to me it is an exception to the rules. How the developer, how the designer, the author, or how did you manage to agree with the author, with the designer, that the last payment will be done after examination or verification? So if we organize a competition for the developer, for the designer, we set our requirements and we can put it into our requirements. And if the developer, the designer agrees, so no problems. This is not a big amount, actually. It is 10% of the sum, and they still want to get it. So it is 10% from the general sum of the amount of the agreement. So this 10% are paid after the documents and everything is verified. So agreement is very simple. Either you work and follow our conditions and requirements, and you get these financial resources, or you work according to your own conditions, and it means you do not work with us. So everything is very simple, very clear. Another small remark. It is clear that there are organizations that actually work according to the traditional rules, and there are some more advanced organizations, let's say, and it's really very easy to negotiate with them and state. So you work, for instance, in the project that is funded by the EU, and you, for instance, work on the technical design, or you work in construction, and in your activities, you follow the European requirements. So if you state it like that, and if the organization follows it, it's definitely a big plus for the portfolio. And if such organizations have good management, they will probably make some concessions to you in order to include your project, if it is successful, into their portfolio, and this will be a big plus to their business reputation. Some more questions or comments? Then